The rain didn't just fall that night. It pounded the roof of Mason's old truck like the sky itself was angry. He hadn't seen his Aunt Evelyn in years, not since his mother passed. But something pulled him toward that broken-down trailer deep in the woods outside of Maple Hollow. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was a voice he hadn't heard in too long. When he stepped inside, the stench of mildew and rot clung to the walls. And there, in a threadbare chair, was Aunt Evelyn, shivering, clutching a chipped mug of cold tea, her frame nearly swallowed by the blanket draped over her knees. His chest clenched. She looked up, her cloudy eyes still familiar, still kind. "Mason," she breathed, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You came?" The words hit harder than the rain ever could. Mason had trusted his cousin Ryan to care for her, Ryan and his wife Zoe. They said they would. He handed over her care, thinking he was doing the right thing. But now, looking around, soup cans on the floor, no heat, no warmth, he realized he'd made a devastating mistake. When Evelyn whispered, "There's something I never told you," her voice barely audible over the storm, Mason's world shifted. It wasn't just neglect. It was betrayal. Mason didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't collapse into rage. Instead, he moved. With a steady urgency, he wrapped Evelyn's shoulders in a warmer blanket and packed her small bag. An old nightgown, a faded photograph of her and his mother, and her cracked spin Bible. Every movement was careful, like he was trying not to break what was left of her spirit. He called Ryan. The phone rang 4 times before he finally answered with a groggy, irritated voice. "What now, Mason?" Mason's grip tightened on the phone. "Where the hell are you? Evelyn's here, freezing, alone in your damn trailer." Ryan's voice turned defensive. "We're doing what we can. She's fine." "No, she's not," Mason shot back. "She's coming with me." Ryan argued, Zoe's voice piping up in the background, but Mason didn't care. He hung up, hands shaking, not from fear, but fury. At 52 years old, he'd lived enough to know when someone was lying. And this was no misunderstanding, this was neglect. Mason and his late wife, Grace, never had children. Their small-town diner, Hollow Hearth, had been their legacy. But Evelyn, she had been Mason's anchor ever since his mom died in a car crash when he was just 10. She filled the silence with warm cinnamon rolls and bedtime stories. Her kitchen was safety. Her love was constant, and now seeing her abandoned and forgotten, something inside him shifted. As they drove back through winding forest rows under a sky full of thunder, Evelyn leaned against the truck window. Weak, quiet, her voice broke through the hum of the windshield wipers. "There's something you need to know," she whispered. Then her eyes closed, too tired to continue. Mason didn't press her, but the words sank into his bones. A secret. A truth too heavy for the storm. And something told him this wasn't just about old age or neglect. This was something far, far deeper. By morning, the rain had quieted, but Mason's heart hadn't. The diner was already warming with the smell of bacon when he placed Evelyn gently in the upstairs apartment above Hollow Hearth. It was the same cozy space Grace had once filled with laughter and quilted blankets. He tucked her into bed, brushing silver strands from her face. She looked so small, so fragile. And yet the weight of her words from the night before still pressed against his chest. "There's something you need to know." He didn't have time to dwell. The bell above the diner door jingled like a gunshot. Ryan barged in, Zoe right behind him, her arms crossed tight and face twisted with that familiar, sour defiance. The regulars, farmhands, truckers, and retirees, fell silent, sensing the tension before words even formed. "You can't just take her like that," Ryan shouted, boots slapping against the linoleum. Mason didn't flinch. He set the spatula down, wiped his hands on his apron, and met his cousin's eyes. When you leave her in a damn shack with no heat," he said coldly. Zoe stepped forward, her perfume slicing through the air. "She's our responsibility, not yours." "No," Mason growled. "What you're doing isn't care, it's abandonment." Then he went for the jugular. "Where's her money, Ryan? The savings she had, what happened to it?" Ryan's face twitched. "Just a second," but it was enough. "We borrowed it," he muttered. "Business was rough. Debts. She said it was fine." Mason laughed, bitter, sharp, full of hurt. "She'd have given you everything if you'd asked, but she would have never agreed to be left like that. You stole from her." She's old, Zoe snapped. She barely knows what's happening half the time. That was it. Mason pointed at the door, rage ice cold in his veins. Get out, both of you. She's staying here now. Ryan hesitated, but the crowd had heard enough. As the bell above the door chimed again, the regulars slowly turned back to their coffee and eggs, but their eyes lingered on Mason, a silent nod of respect. He didn't care about their stares. He only cared about Evelyn, safe upstairs, resting in the space she should have always had. But still, her whisper haunted him. There's something you need to know. And deep down, Mason felt it wasn't just about stolen money or lies. It was something that had been buried for decades, rotting just beneath the surface. The evening sun slipped behind the pine trees as Mason sat by Evelyn's side, brushing out her hair with the old wooden brush she once used on him as a boy. Her eyes fluttered closed with every gentle stroke, a small, contented smile playing on her lips. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence felt full, like a page just waiting for the last word. You remember the kitchen on Willow Street? Mason said softly. You let me roll out dough even when I ruined half of it. Said the trying mattered more than the mess. Evelyn smiled faintly. That's how we rise, Mason. Heart steady, hands kind. But then her smile faded, her fingers folded in her lap, knuckles pale. I made some hard choices, she murmured almost to herself. Ones I hoped you'd never have to understand. Mason paused, heart tightening. What choices, Aunt Ev? She didn't answer. Her gaze drifted to the window, out to the pines bending in the wind like old secrets. Her body seemed thinner than ever. He wanted to press her, to demand. But she looked so delicate, like one more question might shatter her completely. So he held it, swallowed it. Later that night, after locking up the diner, Pete, the old cook who had stuck by Mason since Grace passed, lingered by the back door. Grease still on his hands, voice low. Heard Ryan talking out back, he said, not meeting Mason's eyes. Told Zoe that if you dig too deep, you'll end up hating both of them. Mason froze, the rag in his hand dripping with water. Hating who? Pete shrugged. Didn't say, just figured you should know. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. Evelyn's words, Pete's warning, Ryan's lies. They swirled like a storm, refusing to break. The diner felt off, heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. So he made a decision, and then a scream. Didn't storm anyone's house. Instead, he set the table in the center of the diner. 4 chairs, a pot of strong coffee, and day-old biscuits no one touched. Ryan and Zoe arrived just as expected, looking angry but unsure. Evelyn sat across from Mason, wrapped in a sweater he found in storage. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were clear. I want the truth, Mason said, leaning in. No more excuses, no more hiding. And with the hum of the refrigerator behind them, the layers began to peel back. The truth didn't need yelling, it just needed to be heard. The tension in the diner could have been sliced with a butter knife. Ryan shifted in his chair, eyes darting between Mason and Zoe. Mason didn't blink. You said Evelyn gave you her savings? He said quietly but firmly. Tell me the truth. Ryan sighed, rubbing his temples like he was the one burdened by guilt. Business went bad. We borrowed it. She said she understood. Mason's voice cracked like thunder. She was living in filth, Ryan. Cold soup and mold on the walls. You expect me to believe she agreed to that? Zoe's nails tapped against the table, sharp and constant. You don't understand. We were desperate. She wanted to help. Mason laughed bitterly. She raised me. She knew how to survive on scraps. If she gave you money, it was love, not permission to abandon her. And then for a split second, Ryan's bravado crumbled. His shoulders sank. Okay, he whispered. Yes, we took it. I was drowning. I thought we'd figure it out, pay her back. We just needed more time. Mason stood, chair scraping back across the floor. You had time. You had every chance to tell me, to ask for help. Instead, you drained her dry and left her to rot. Ryan slammed a fist on the table. You think I wanted this? She matters to me too. No, Mason said, voice like ice. She mattered when she had something to give, not when she needed you. The silence after was deafening, but it was Evelyn who broke it. She set her mug down, slow and deliberate. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake, but it sliced clean through the room. I told him to take it. Mason turned, stunned. What? Her eyes met his, cloudy but fierce. I told them to take the money, to protect you. The air left the room. She took a trembling breath. Your mother didn't just die in that crash. Ryan was driving, drunk, 19 and reckless. The cops could have locked him up, but I couldn't lose both of you. So I paid him to disappear, used everything I had. And when he came back, begging, I gave more. To keep it buried, to keep you whole. Mason's knees buckled. The memory of his mother's laugh, the red scarf she wore, the song she always hummed, all twisted inside him. You, he turned to Ryan, voice breaking. You killed her. I didn't mean to, Ryan croaked. It was an accident, dark roads, wet pavement. Stop. Mason held up a hand. Ryan stood, chair clattering behind him, and rushed out the door. Zoe stumbled after him. Mason didn't chase them. He couldn't move. Evelyn reached out, her fingers cold against his. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought I was saving you. But Mason couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at the photo behind the counter, his mom, smiling at a fair, Evelyn's shadow beside her. He'd looked at that photo for years and never once saw the secret hiding in the corners of her smile. Mason didn't sleep that night. The truth hung in the air like smoke, thick, bitter, choking. Evelyn had given everything she had to protect him, her silence, her savings, her soul. And for what? A lie he never asked for, a childhood built on sand. The rain had stopped by morning, but the ache inside him hadn't. Downstairs, the diner remained closed. He couldn't flip the sign yet. Couldn't face the regulars, their kindness too much to bear. Instead, he turned to something that made sense. Dough. Cinnamon rolls. Elena's recipe. He moved by instinct, measuring, kneading, rolling. The flour coated his fingers like a second skin, like hers had so many years ago. The scent of cinnamon filled the room, sweet and sharp, cutting through the grief. When the rolls were done, still steaming, he brought one upstairs to her. She was awake, propped against pillows in the quilt Grace had sewn years ago. She took a small bite, eyes fluttering closed. Perfect, she whispered. He held her hand, and for a moment they were back in that old kitchen, her laughter, her warmth, the safe bubble of memory that made everything else fade. Later, he called Ryan. The phone rang twice before a tired voice answered. What now, Mason? I know everything, Mason said, voice calm. Mom, the crash, what Aunt Evelyn did. Silence. Then a broken, Mason, I didn't. No, Mason interrupted. You don't get to explain. Not anymore. Stay away from us. We're done. He hung up. No yelling, no final blow, just a line drawn in the sand, a boundary. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. A peace, maybe. That evening, he unlocked the diner. A few regulars wandered in. No one asked about the closed sign from earlier. They just sipped coffee, ate the cinnamon rolls, and shared stories about Evelyn. She patched my jacket once, old Mr. Whitman said, voice rough with nostalgia. Didn't even ask for a dime. She told me to stop whining and walk it off, laughed Denise, the town mechanic. Tough as nails, your aunt. Mason listened, their voices a gentle tide washing over him. Evelyn sat by the window, wrapped in that same sweater, her eyes soft with something deeper than gratitude. Pride, maybe even peace. And in that quiet, Mason realized he didn't need revenge. He already had victory. She was here, the truth was out, and the love, it had never left. Days passed, but the weight of Evelyn's confession didn't. Mason kept the diner humming, just enough to stay afloat, but his mind was somewhere else. In the stillness after closing, he often sat with her upstairs, brushing her hair, listening to her breathe. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she just stared out the window. Always, Mason listened. You were my light, she told him one night. I couldn't let him dim it. But he's my brother, Mason whispered, voice thick. I deserved to know. Maybe, she replied, tears in her eyes, but I chose love over truth. That's all I had left to give. Mason had no answer. The next morning, he found himself staring at her old recipe box, the dented tin that had lived on every kitchen counter she ever owned. She had told him there was one more secret hidden inside. He didn't want to open it, but he did. Inside, amid the cards for cornbread and pecan pie, he found it. A folded note tucked beneath the peach cobbler recipe, his name written across it in her shaky hand. And unfolded it, heart thudding. Mason, I kept him away so you could grow. I lost my girl. I couldn't lose you too. Forgive him if you can. I couldn't. Simple, raw, honest. He sank onto a stool, the paper trembling in his fingers, and the tears came, hot, unfiltered, messy. She'd carried this secret alone for decades, protected him, even when it cost her everything. He remembered her kneeling beside his bed as a child, whispering he'd be okay. He hadn't known the price of that promise. Now he did. That day, Mason left the diner close again. Instead, he stayed upstairs with Evelyn, holding her hand, brushing her hair, baking the rolls she loved. Her breathing was shallow, her smile faint. But when he brought up a fresh roll and she took a bite, she closed her eyes and whispered home. That night, she slipped away in her sleep. Mason found her still in the chair, head tilted back, hands folded, peaceful, like she'd just finished telling her final story. He knelt beside her, whispered, "You're home now." And the tears came again, but not from anger, not from pain, from gratitude. She had given him more than truth. She had given him the strength to carry it. The memorial came a week later. Mason didn't hold it at a church or a funeral home. He opened the doors of Hollow Hearth just like Evelyn would have wanted. Locals flooded in, farmers in flannel, toddlers with sticky fingers, retirees who had shared decades of coffee across her counter. No one wore black. No one gave stiff eulogies. They came with stories. "She fixed my bike once," said Cal, a rancher with calloused hands. "Told me to stop crying and ride. She made me a pie when my husband left," whispered Margot, blinking fast behind her glasses. "Didn't say a word, just handed it to me warm." There were dozens like them, and as they shared, Mason passed around trays of her cinnamon rolls, the last batch he'd ever make, with her memory still fresh in the air. The scent wrapped around the room like a hug. One woman left a note beside the register. "Ruth taught us all, not just with words, but how she lived." Mason read it 3 times, and with each reading, something shifted inside him. She wasn't just his Evelyn. She had quietly held up half the town without asking for anything in return. A seamstress of the soul, stitching broken hearts with food and fierce kindness. Months later, Mason hung the photo he found tucked inside the recipe box. Evelyn and his mother laughing in a field frozen in joy. He placed it by the register right where everyone could see. The diner returned to its rhythm, griddles sizzling, mugs clinking, stories swapping across booths. But something had changed. Mason no longer ran the place alone. He carried Evelyn with him in the way he folded dough, the way he looked people in the eye, the way he stood a little taller, spoke a little gentler. See, he didn't talk about Ryan. Didn't need to. Some wounds stay closed. Some victories are quiet. What would you have done if you were Mason? If the truth had been buried beneath cinnamon and silence, would you have forgiven him or walked away? Sometimes the people who protect us the most are also the ones who hurt us the deepest. But maybe, just maybe, love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, staying through the storm, and carrying the weight, even when the truth cracks your heart wide open. So now I ask you, if you uncovered a truth that changed everything, would you speak it or let it rest?